At first glance, this might look like a normal vintage watch. However, the story behind the watch holds so much more and is incredibly interesting, and you can buy it for less than £100. The watch we're actually looking at in this video and the clips that you'll be seeing is of a Pobeda. Now I'm going to pronounce that once because I'm not very good at it, and yeah, it directly translates as victory in English from Russian. And it's a Soviet watch. It was made, this model specifically was actually made in the 80s. I just wanted to start off by talking about the brand Victory, because the setup was a little bit different to what your standard watch company might be nowadays, like your Rolexes, Omega, whatever. Or to be fair, in this price range, maybe more Seiko, things like that. It was actually made in several different Soviet factories across the whole of the USSR at the time. And unlike the modern sort of setup we got today, so for example, the Swiss sort of setup with the watches there who compete against each other, obviously, in the market themselves. The Soviet watchmaking was actually centrally planned, and the factories, they all belonged to the state themselves, and they were produced almost as a national effort instead of a private business to make money. Of course, with the politics in their country at that time and how it was set up, that is how most companies worked. And production grew quite a lot. Obviously, they had to supply the citizens of the nation up until World War II, where the factories that were producing these watches had to stop, primarily because they needed to start making other things. Of course, at the time it would have been weapons manufacturing, so maybe ammunition. The watchmaking industry in the Soviet Union completely collapsed and stopped. But when the war finally ended, obviously efforts then went back to providing watches for the citizens. They wanted to celebrate the victory as a nation, of course, and by doing so, they created this watch here, so the Victory watch. Again, not going to pronounce it. I don't know if this is fully true or not, but apparently Joseph Stalin actually had a direct input to what this brand or what these particular watches were going to be called, and Victory was one of the ideas that they came up with. Now, it wasn't supposed to be designed for a luxury, as a luxury good, so it's supposed to be a reliable, ordinary, and it worked for the everyday citizen of the Soviet Union. And then over the following decades, millions would be produced. So if you ever look online for vintage watches, a lot of them will be from the Soviet era. Now, the actual watch I've got here, of course, I think it's a fantastic piece. It's a really interesting style, I believe. The dial, of course, is a silver dial, and it actually has this kind of grainy background on it, which I think looks really, really fantastic. And of course, we've got the gold numbers all across the watch, which really pop against that silver. Of course, it also has the small second hand at the bottom of the dial, which you can see obviously ticking over just fine here. I believe the watch is nice and simple, minimalistic, it does the job. And actually, the styling, I think, on this particular watch, you can actually see from a lot of from modern watches nowadays, especially the font. It looks very similar to the styling, I think, on the Kuo Royal Smith. Apologies if I again pronounced that wrong. I'm terrible with this sort of thing. If you have a look at the images I've put up on screen here, I think the font and actually the style of the dial as well, with the grainy back, like I said before, is very, very similar. I've heard some great things about that watch brand, so obviously I think technically it's a lot more modern. The style, I think, is pretty timeless on this watch. I can see that there's been some sold recently for £70, anywhere sort of between £50 to £100, it looks like, for this particular watch. It was made in the 80s. I actually had a bit of concern that the timekeeping wasn't going to be very good, and actually it keeps time pretty well. I've never had a problem. I've never had it tested, so again, I couldn't give you the exact numbers on that, but all I know, yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. I think you're not going to expect huge amounts from a watch this price. And from this era. Sizing wise, it's quite small on the wrist. Can't really notice it on. You probably see the images. I've actually recently wore it to the beach, for example. Really, really hot day there, and yeah, I didn't feel uncomfortable or anything like that. One thing I would say is I didn't go into the ocean with this watch on, of course. However, I was quite comfortable leaving it, on the beach while I went in there. Again, it's the benefit of the price on this one. Again, it's a small watch, so it comes in at about 34 millimeters for the case size on this one. It's a mechanical manual watch, so you do have to wind it up by hand. The caliber in this watch is the 2602, and it features 15 joules. And again, I've never had a problem with the timekeeping on this one, just for the amount of time that I use it on a kind of day-to-day basis. Now, the strap I've got on this watch is aftermarket. I feel like the kind of darker grey with the light grey looks quite nice. So again, I've seen many models online with kind of different styling. Some people with the sort of more metal sort of strap on there, but I feel like keeping that little vintage look with the leather strap, I think really works well on this one here. So the Pobeda watch, again, that I have here, I absolutely love. I think it's really interesting, obviously, in a day where you can go out and buy really expensive watches, thousands of pounds. You know, of course, it comes with a rich history with some of these sort of bigger brands. However, you know, for less than £100, you can buy something which is directly linked to, you know, one of the most fascinating parts of modern history. If anyone ever asked me about a watch, you know, if this is the one I've got on my wrist, I'm extremely pleased that they've asked me, as most watch enthusiasts will probably know. Yeah, it's always nice to be able to tell a story with a watch and give a bit of background to what's actually on your wrist. I've actually found some other watches from Soviet watches from the era that I find really interesting. You'll notice on some of the dials there are different prints. A lot of the time they seem to have the radiation symbol, or like a fighter jet, for example. So there's so many options with these watches. And that's it for today's video. So please like if you enjoyed, leave a comment, let me know, do you have any sort of historical watches that you really enjoy, really like? Feel free to leave a comment, tell the story. I'll try and reply, of course, where I can, and yeah, I'd love to hear about it. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.